I'm going to read a segment from Caleb Maupin's book, We Are City Builders, which is an educational manual. The section is 1.1.2, The Death of Julius Caesar. As you know, historically, it's said to have been March the 15th. So here we go. The typical Roman was a hedonist who bet money on Colosseum fights and chariot races while seeking pleasure from orgies, drunkenness, and overeating, often to the point of induced vomit. The archetype of a shallow, pleasure-hungry sadist was actively cultivated by the empire. These included gladiatorial shows, infanticide, and other barbaric practices designed to stimulate the primitive side of the human mind. For the minority of Romans whose intellect would not allow them to be satisfied by hedonism, the Stoic cults emerged to satisfy their need to find deeper meaning in life. For the Stoics, the sadism of Roman life was replaced by a glorified machoism, dressed up in spiritual and philosophical pretensions. Romans who wanted more meaning in their lives than physical pleasure and cruelty would induce states of a supposed mysticism with ritualized self-mutilation, flagellation, and even starvation. The Stoics would drug themselves in order to have hallucinations, believing this to be a way of connecting to divinity. The Stoic Romans would worship some new god imported from part of the empire, forming little cults in the hopes of finding truths concealed by the official imperial gods with a small g. The Stoic Romans, who longed for something more out of life, would often be preyed upon by philosophical conmen like Seneca. These charlatans preached on the supposed ethical merits of poverty while demanding huge sums in tribute from their flock. The apparent hypocrisy of various Stoic gurus and preachers became the subject of more Roman comedies. While the Romans who rejected the hedonism and cruelty of the empire were more intelligent and had potential to create real change, their ability to break with societal norms was simply channeled into another avenue of self-destruction. Yet even within this nightmare of historical reaction called the Roman Empire, the city-building tendency within humanity asserted itself. Gaius Julius Caesar, a military man born among the aristocracy, emerged in the late Roman Republic to represent a progressive vision. Michael Parenti's award-winning work of political science and historiography, The Assassination of Julius Caesar, A People's History of Ancient Rome, tells of a maligned populist and reformer who championed everyday Romans against the wealthy landowners. Parenti writes, he used state power to effect some limited benefits to small farmers, debtors, and the urban proletariat, at the expense of the wealthy few. No matter how limited these reforms proved to be, the oligarchs never forgave him, and so Caesar met the same fate as other Roman reformers before him. Again, that's a quote from Michael Parenti's book. Parenti's book, recounting the life and death of Julius Caesar, was the 2004 online review of Books Nonfiction Book of the Year, the same year that Parenti published his widely praised text, The Caucus for New Political Science, gave him the Career Achievement Award. Parenti's scholarship was groundbreaking because it showed Julius Caesar in a completely different light, challenging the narrative put forward by William Shakespeare and the Roman historians who favored the perspective of the wealthy elite. Parenti draws from the words of those who demonized Caesar to show that their contempt was rooted in their own class interests. Parenti quotes sources such as the Greek biographer and essayist Plutarch, who accused Caesar of, quote, stirring up and attaching himself to numerous diseased and corrupted elements in polity, end quote. Parenti also quotes Appian, another Roman historian, who described Caesar as being introduced, quote, laws to better the conditions of the poor, end quote. And Julius Caesar, who sought to shift the Roman Empire toward a more sustainable and progressive role in the world and champion the proletariat, was stabbed to death by wealthy senators in 44 BCE. The specifics of Caesar's reforms show him as a thoroughly progressive-minded leader. Caesar sent the unemployed proletarians of Rome to rebuild city-states throughout the empire in the hopes of making them thriving centers of trade. Caesar constructed public libraries, giving the citizenry access to written records and information. Caesar cracked down on moneylenders, lifted the restrictions and penalties on debtors, and imposed luxury taxes on the decadent rich. Caesar granted Roman citizenship to all doctors and teachers, hoping to reward and cultivate the kind of people who could make Rome a center of science, civilization, and culture. Caesar was appointed by the Senate for a 10-year term as the imperator, or Roman head of state. On 3 occasions, Caesar was offered a crown, but each time he declined to become a monarch. Despite being a strong man, Caesar remained an advocate of democracy and was loved by the people. His power came from thousands of Roman proletarians, free citizens with no property, who saw him as their champion against the wealthy landowners and senators. This mobilization of the people as a populari, or populist, made Caesar far more powerful than any king or emperor could be. Caesar's vision for reconstructing Roman society involved mobilizing millions of people, not as plundering raiders extracting tribute, but as city builders continuing the great project of making music, for which Socrates had been executed by a similarly cruel, short-sighted elite. Parenti explains, quote, "The Senate aristocrats killed Caesar because they perceived him to be a popular leader who threatened their privileged interests," end quote. The greatest sin of Julius Caesar in the eyes of the Roman elite was his talk of land redistribution, ensuring that a tiny oligarchy would not maintain a monopoly over the main sources of wealth for Roman society, the mines and plantations. Parenti quotes Plutarch in describing how Caesar's land reform law, quote, provided that almost the whole of Campania be divided among the poor and needy, end quote. Caesar also talked of granting citizenship to people throughout the rest of the empire. Parenti quotes Roman historian Cicero, who bemoaned that Caesar planned to confer, quote, citizenship not merely on individuals but on entire nations and provinces, end quote. If people in Central Europe, Persia, North Africa, and other conquered lands could join with the Roman people in setting the policies and enjoying the fruits of the empire, the civilization might be more sustainable. Having championed the common people, Julius Caesar was stabbed to death in the hall of the Roman Senate. Parenti explains the assassination, quote, Caesar was branded a traitor to his class by members of that class. He committed the unforgivable sin of trying to redistribute, albeit in modest proportions, some of the wealth that the very rich tirelessly siphoned from state coffers and from the labor of the many. It was unforgivable that he should tamper with the system of upward expropriation that they embraced as their own birthright. Caesar seems not to have comprehended that in the conflict between the haves and have-nots, the haves are really have-it-alls. The Roman aristocrats lambasted the palest reforms as the worst kind of thievery, the beginning of a calamitous revolutionary leveling necessitating extreme countermeasures. And they presented their violent retaliation not as an ugly class expediency, but as an honorable act on behalf of Republican liberty, end quote. The assassination of Julius Caesar, though it was met with riots and rebellions among the people, ultimately doomed Roman civilization. Some of the very senators who had stabbed Caesar wept by his funeral pyre. They realized that their empire needed a progressive thinker, a strong leader, an advocate of kindness, compassion, and solidarity to lead it towards something better. But yet, in love with their own profits, the greedy and the rich have stabbed to death the very person who could save their empire from its own self-destructive, vandal tendencies. Again, that's section 1.1.2 in the book We Are City Builders by Caleb Maupin. which is an educational manual, and it's on the subject of Julius Caesar. And it focuses on why transition to something better is better than the collapse of a system with a lot of problems. And there are a lot of similarities in the world that we have now in the 21st century. What do those solutions look like? Check out the 4-point economic plan of the Center for Political Innovation, and you'll get some ideas. We do need a government of action for working families.